Greetings and welcome to Education in Focus, powered by Chalkboard News. I'm Dan McCaleb, Vice President of News and Content at the Franklin News Foundation, which publishes Chalkboard. Chalkboard is a news website dedicated to issues related to K-12 education. And joining me again today, as he does each and every week, is Brendan Clary, Chalkboard's editor. Brendan, last week on one of the Education in Focus episodes, we talked about some school districts that are either already on their way or are exploring 4-day school weeks. But due to learning loss, which we've talked about significantly and education groups across the country are well aware of, learning loss during the pandemic when governments shut down schools to in-person learning, went fully remote for a period of time, that our students suffered significant learning loss from that. And as a result of that now, there are some experts in the field who say shortening a school week is not what's needed, but lengthening a school year is what's going to take at least some students to recover from the learning loss they suffered. Tell us more about this.
There's a recent publication of data from an education assessment organization, and that's called the Northwest Evaluation Association. And they basically released their own test score data. So it's not like the national test scores. I believe it's a proprietary, they can give. It's an assessment that they can give to students to track their educational achievement. Against other years and, in different, a metric that the school districts can use, teachers can use. And they basically found that the students have not caught up yet from, their pandemic-related learning losses, that they are not performing in the same way that they were before the pandemic. And so they were, there were achievement gains, but they lagged pre-pandemic levels in all but, the very youngest of students, maybe the ones who were not impacted as much by the COVID pandemic, maybe because they weren't in school yet, maybe they were still, at home or something like that. So it's basically that report got into the time. It broke it down. Instead of saying, this is what it's going to take to get back to normal, it kind of got into, here's the time that's going to be needed to catch up to the pre-COVID level. And so they found that the average student would require about 4 months of additional schooling to catch up to pre-COVID levels.
Just want to clarify, this is the average student. This is not your lowest performing students who come from,
Right. Yeah, this is the average student that would require 4.1 months of additional schooling to catch up to pre-COVID levels. So we're talking, that's pretty much an entire spring semester, right? Like 2 marking periods sort of things, and 4.5 months in math. And it basically said, summer school is not going to do it, especially for those who were put furthest behind because of the pandemic. And they get into, if you're a student who is part of a minority community, or you have been in an underfunded school and you were kind of left behind by the pandemic to start out with, like you're not going to be able to catch up through like a targeted summer school program. And they estimated, and this was kind of the shocking part for me, is that these researchers found that the average 7th grade student is looking at almost 6 months of additional schooling in math and reading to catch up. But that 8th graders are the worst off, that older, and it's just an interesting trend that older students, require this amount of time. But they found that the average 8th grade student is going to need 7.4 months to catch up on reading, and more than an entire traditional school year, 9.1 months to catch up in math. And so I think it's helpful to break it down the way that they did in terms of thinking about how much additional schooling students are going to need, because I think it shows how far some students are behind. So, that 8th grade student who lost, formative years during the COVID-19 pandemic because of online learning, they're going to need so much intervention to get them on track to graduate with, the same amount of achievement, academic achievement that is going to basically be like another school year in terms of math. And so I think that's a very helpful way to put it, and not something that I had seen before. I think most of the time we're talking just kind of abstractly about test score declines. And, we know we can get a kind of a picture that it's not good, but putting it that way as opposed to another metric, I think is really helpful to kind of illustrate, because we can all kind of see, I think, how much time students need to spend in school to get to where they need to be, right? And so if we can kind of think about it that way, I think it's helpful. So
I think it's helpful, but I guess my question coming out of that is, what are the policy actions we as a society going to take about that? You're not going to hold every 8th grader back for another school year. Is it just lost and gone forever? I mean, what do we do?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think that's sort of the question that school districts are asking, state legislatures are asking with this COVID money as well that's come in for these sorts of interventions. Like, how do we apply this the best way? If we have a summer program, how much will that help? And, like, and this assessment said, this research said, it won't be able to cut it. So, like, how do you is it direct tutoring for that? We're targeting that toward 8th grade students or, soon to be 9th grade students who need remedial math or is it, some states have sort of looked at this and said, we are going to take a new look at our 3rd grade reading laws. And so, like, that's something that I've written before about is, we're basically going to change the standards so that we don't have all of these students applying for exemptions exemptions from being held back, right? So there are sort of these kind of bigger questions that are affecting, the policy landscape about student achievement and how we measure that and how we handle students, right? So I don't know. I think it's a big question. I don't really have the answer, unfortunately, about, how can we, help these specific students. And that's sort of, I think, where everybody's sort of like, how do we get through to them and help them succeed with this amount of learning loss, right?
Yeah, well, you don't have the answers, Brennan, because I don't think anybody does. There's one absolute takeaway I think we all can agree on that we need to take away from those is the school shutdowns and the conversion to remote learning. And some school districts, certainly some states, force the remote learning longer than others, that they were just ineffective, and that God willing there's not, but there probably will be another pandemic. Hopefully it's decades and decades from now, but learn the lessons of that moving forward. Yeah, I don't think anybody has the solution how we're going to get these kids caught up, what it's going to mean for their futures, for their future learning, for their future careers. We just don't know because there's not enough data. There's not enough time there yet. Brendan, we've talked about learning loss and the outcomes of it significantly, and we're going to continue to talking about that, but this is all the time we have this week. Readers can keep up with this story and more at chalkboardnews.com. For Brendan Clary, I'm Dan McCaleb. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe.